freight position from the haven ports is such that there is the improvement and the gauge clearance being done, as you probably know, from Felixstowe through to Nuneaton in two parts, to Peterborough first and then Peterborough to Nuneaton, which will enable containers destined for West Midlands and the North West and Scotland, and indeed the Yorkshire terminals, to be able to go by rail, particularly the deep sea containers, which will relieve which will mean they don't have to go the Ipswich and North London line, Wilson Junction, West Coast Main Line route, which on the face of it would seem to relieve some capacity to maybe bring rail freight onto the A12 corridor in its place that would serve London and the southwest. The issue seems to be that the kind of distances involved from the haven ports to London, plus the lack of any well-sited and well-equipped intermodal interchange in the London area, means that, and it accords with my own understanding too, there's unlikely to be much possibility for transfer from road to rail of containers coming out of the haven ports and destined for London. So the kind of obvious thing of let's transfer some of the lorries carrying containers on the A12 down to the M25 in London onto rail doesn't seem to have much traction because of the unattractive economics for a distance as short as that, and also the lack of an intermodal interchange in the London area that a rail freight could use for its final distribution. That's the picture we've been given so far, and I'm afraid it accords with my own sense of what's likely to be possible too, which is disappointing, but I think that is the real position. On passenger rail, there does seem to be some available capacity, particularly with the new vehicles promised by the government, new rail vehicles promised by the government under the HLOS programme announced last year. There still are opportunities for further train lengthening on the Great Eastern Main Line, and there are particular pinch points of crowding on trains, but it's not huge, and when Crossrail comes along, that again will release some capacity at the London end. So I think that any transfer from road to rail by passengers is not for the short medium term inhibited by capacity and crowding issues, except at one or two particular places, and there still is a bit of capacity left in some of the park and ride car parks, and we're hearing that there's an increasing use of buses and cycling and motorcycling for people getting to railway stations in the corridor, which is good. I just wondered if you had any take on that or any observations on that.
Well, firstly, I take your point about rail freight. Terminals, I think the issue of terminals is the core one, actually.
It is a crucial one, yeah.
It is. And with high land values, rail freight, intermodal freight terminals don't do well, and they're also, frankly, not regarded as good neighbours. So they tend to, they tend not to be favoured by planning authorities either. And there's a big argument going on at the moment about keeping some kind of rail freight capacity at Cricklewood against housing development, and that's a core site, on the M1 North Circular Junction. So that doesn't. I mean, I don't think this inquiry, if I may suggest, should be constrained from saying actually it would be worth looking for a terminal site in East London for an intermodal depot, and it would be worth. And there has been talk of doing something around Dagenham, for instance, and I think that there's more willingness to consider shorter distance rail runs now, and that there are opportunities for transshipment are easier, and particularly if you move in the direction of consolidation centres.
Where they add some logistics value.
That's right, yes.
And aren't simply for transshipment. Yes.
And then that makes quite a lot of sense. So I wouldn't turn you completely off rail.
Right.
I think the terminal point's important. I mean, as I understand it, the Felixstowe, what you're getting Felixstowe and Nuneaton is gauge clearance, but longer term there's the issue. You need to add capacity to that route, and if you do that, and particularly do things at the Ipswich Felixstowe end, you could reckon to get Felixstowe's rail freight share from 25% as it is now up to 35%. Those are rail freight.
I think there is a point here in that the inquiry can perfectly legitimately say we've read the Greater Anglia Russ.
Yes.
Sort of done. It's very clear what it has to say about freight, Peterborough and Nuneaton, and that is good. It had very, very little to say about freight on the Great Eastern route.
That's right.
But you, ODFT, are embarking on this in this post-Eddington world, looking at corridors. There is an issue on, if you like, the Great Eastern Corridor, both road and rail, in terms of freight. Because they're both under pressure, and lo and behold, look at what Felixstowe now embarked upon. So there's a challenge here for you. I don't think there's an answer we can put on the table.
But I think it's worth challenging.
Yes.
And I think, well, that's been, of course, the big issue around the Thames Port proposal, and the which will have an impact on this road, and that actually things like upgrading the Barking line and so on, freight, and the House Tunnel. I mean, there are some things that are going to make a difference that will have an impact on the A12 potentially. So freight originating not at Felixstowe but on Thames Haven and coming across London. That if you do things for rail, that will have an impact on the A12 for that. On passenger rail, I think. And that's, I think that's broadly right. You're reading on that. There is capacity, particularly with train lengthening and with Crossrail. The thing I'd say is that I think I'm glad you've heard evidence that there's more kind of bus, cycle, motorcycle access to stations.
Yes, good.
And I know Colchester have bid for, Colchester have bid, but also actually CTC have bid for a number of their stations, with Essex in fact, to be get a station travel plan pilot status, which is going to kind of, which means that there's some real interest there in doing that. Which and even stations off the A12 corridor, like Southend or somewhere, there's a potential for some of that to have an impact on. Or further up in Essex, to have for more transfer to rail and making it easier to transfer to rail, to have an impact on.